Hi, everyone. Super happy to have you here. We have a great session today, I think, about communities and how to tie communities to customer engagement and advocacy. We have two amazing experts, um, Scott Wilder from HubSpot currently, um, Donnie Weinstein from ex-Domo and HP. So I think it's going to be super impressive. They have experience. Donnie has from B2C and B2B. Scott, I think, predominantly B2B. And we're going to run this session with Q&A. So you can see in the Zoom, of course, we have chat, but we also have the Q&A. It's great if you just put your questions during the session Q&A. We'll have at least 4 or 5 stops during the sessions to capture those questions. So feel free to just put in Q&A. That's first of all. Any other, besides that, let's kind of start to dive in as people join us. And of course, this session is recorded. We'll send the recording after the session. So as an intro, for those of you who join and don't really know what customer marketing is all about, customer advocacy, and how do communities fit in, just to give some background. So customer marketing is relatively a new domain, a new category. We look at it as everything post-sale. Once a customer becomes a customer, how do marketing organizations assist with customer success, assist with customer engagement? That's kind of, it's a life cycle process from onboarding, events, community, which is the topic that we're going to dive into today on this webinar. Of course, advocacy of many types and sorts, voice of customer and feedback, references, lifecycle marketing in the sense of course, upsell, expansion, and overall communications to customers across their journey. That's kind of how we look at this, the pillars of customer marketing. And it's the industry is kind of on high speed right now. I think COVID has helped a bit. We see a lot of companies looking at lifecycle marketing and journey-based, and we see a lot of companies starting to tie post-sale marketing to revenue, same way as demand generation not only needs to bring leads, but also kind of how many converted. Customer marketing is very oriented revenue, whether it's upsell, ROI tracking, and we mainly see a lot of new positions. Just take a look. I just ran these searches today for them to be current. There's like 2,000, almost 3,000 openings for customer advocacy, 1,000 openings for customer marketing. You can see the different companies here, New Relic, Workday, etc. So, I mean, there are thousands of positions in this domain and growing because companies understand the investment in customer base. And CrowdWorkit is helping to build this community. This is a bit what this webinar is about. We also have a Slack group. We've just launched an industry job board for people, and we try to help people connect and find their jobs if you're interested. We're going to have an expert zone in this domain, so feel free to reach out to us for help in this category, getting acquainted with it, whatnot. One word about CrowdWorkit, and that's it. No more commercials. CrowdWorkit is a B2B customer lifecycle marketing platform. We're building the category and hopefully building the best product in the domain and helping companies understand their post-sale lifecycle and engage their customers. Upcoming webinars, before I kind of move the mic to Scott and Donnie. So we're going to have this month, at the end of the month, a webinar about reference management best practices. We're going to have next month 2 more webinars, one about reviews and how to build a review strategy, and also about the whole customer experience and how that all ties to product marketing. So keep in touch because it's going to be interesting. Last thing, I'm going to put in the chat a link to this one-on-one session. 2 amazing women, Dina and Liz, who's ever in the industry probably knows them, are going to have tomorrow actually a kind of a session, a workshop, entry for customer advocacy marketing. We're going to give you the code. You can register free. I think it's great. They're experts. It's great. So whoever wants to learn a bit more about the domain, the link is going to be soon in the chat, and use this code. I'm also going to CrowdWorkit friend, and you'll just enter free instead of paying $80. And with that, I'm done. I'm going to launch a poll while we intro Donnie and Scott, and they talk a bit about themselves. And 20 winners of this poll are going to have a choice of one of these great 6 books, which we're going to send through Audible. And now I'm really done. So thank you all for joining us. And Scott and Donnie, I guess introduce yourselves, and then Scott, the mic is yours.
Okay, I'll have to be able to share my screen too.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing mine and launch the poll while you start. Maybe Donnie, before Scott starts, just introduce yourself, and then Scott will introduce himself and take his whole session.
Sure. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Donnie Weinstein. I'm a community builder and strategist and advisor. I've been in the community space for more than a dozen years, in the B2C space with Hewlett Packard, and the B2B world more recently with Domo, and I'm excited to be here today. So thanks, Scott, for coordinating.
Sure thing. Scott, you're on.
Okay, great. I am in the process of sharing. Okay, so I'll introduce myself first. Scott Wilder. I'm at HubSpot, as you know. This is week 6 for me. Before this, kind of had, I'll say, 2 lives. One was in the community space, starting the Intuit community efforts. And 2 is starting the Marketing Nation at Marketo. So now I'm on the other side. I went from purple to orange at HubSpot. And then the second life was most recently at Udacity and Coursera on the online learning space. Today I'm going to talk about, I get a lot of questions about community and where it resides in the organization. I'll take a little deeper dive in HubSpot and how we think about community engagement and just general community engagement, and then look into the crystal ball and try and project what's going to happen in the next year. Sometimes people ask me to look 3 years out, but that's difficult. So I'm often asked, why is community in marketing? Why is it in support, or where it is? I tell folks that one thing you need to know is where you are in the organization can impact how it plays out on the community itself, right? So if you sit in support, obviously you're going to have more support questions. If you sit in marketing, then it's going to skew towards marketing, product, et cetera. So the center of gravity is really important. I'm just going to take some data here from Community Roundtable. A lot of people say, well, it's unusual to be in marketing, but actually you can see here based on some of their recent research, community does often appear in marketing itself. Is that the right answer? Well, before I answer that, support can still be pretty important. So at HubSpot, basically I do sit in marketing, but we are a very cross-functional team in the sense that all our meetings are with support, academy, et cetera, with product. And we look at it as kind of a center of excellence. That being said, support and support-related information can be a great way to jumpstart a community. You can be the Trojan horse that gets people there first, and then you can evolve from product-related questions and answers to marketing-related questions and answers. But community is a team sport, and the reason I set up this diagram like this is because I do consider customers part of my team and part of the community team. So what do I mean by that? Basically, in every environment I've been in, I've actually invited customers to my staff meetings. I've had them present at staff meetings. We all know about co-creation and how important that is. So even though the customer's in the middle, it's really important that they are part of the team that's building out the community. That being said, I'm not going to go through all the items here, but obviously multiple groups can benefit. So I'll just take a few of them. Product and engineering can benefit because you can have your beta testers connect there. You can do ideation. Right now, we're doing something on the community called the lab, where we basically are prototyping new ideas. It could be via surveys. It could be a prototype of a design, and we get real-time feedback. Marketing, I'll talk about later on. Our learning, you could have study groups. You could even have professors give Ask the Experts or Ask Me Anything sort of sessions. I will spend a few minutes on customer success. So some of the ways I've used customer success in the past, like at Marketo and plan to do at HubSpot, is customer success can be alerted when certain clients, certain accounts go on the community. So if they go into a certain area, we have a marketing hub, we have a service hub. If they've subscribed to the marketing hub, but then they started poking around the service hub, you can send an alert to the customer success team. You could also use it for early warning. So some of the things we did in the past was we had what I call a red list. So we knew that when an account was not very active in using their instance for a while, we set it up so when they did come on the community, we would alert the customer success team. So how do you structure this cross-functional group? it's really important to have the DC, the driver, the approver, the contributor described, laid out. Pods, so it's really interesting. Every day we have a pod, a cross-functional pod of somebody from support, from product, etc. Each group has a captain who really owns and runs that different part of the community. And then it's really important to be aligned in terms of metrics, and I'll talk about that in a second. So again, just guiding principles. You know, it's funny, I was going back in the time machine and saw an interview with me in 2008. And back then I was talking about community being thought of as a center of excellence. And when I was into it, I actually had them change my group every year just to make sure that each group was properly representing the community. So one year I was in product, one year I was in support, one year I was in customer success, etc. So at HubSpot, so that's kind of like from an organization perspective. And then when we drill down and
maybe before you continue,
Yep.
we'll take a break just for a few questions. So first of all, I'm reminding everybody to put the questions in the Q&A would be great. But we have already a question from Mike asking, do you really think that marketing is the best place in the organization to be the community manager? And why is that?
Great question. I actually think product is a great place. And the reason I think that is because I think of community as a product. And so if I had my, druthers, probably I would put community in the product space. But I think what's more important is when you're either launching or starting a new journey with community is really figure out which groups need a seat at the table and how you organize things at that table, right? So I sit in marketing, but if you ask me about my, yesterday, for example, I probably spent more time interacting with product, customer success, and other teams than I did with my own team.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's go ahead with the flywheel.
So, my group is called the Customer Engagement Group, and we're really trying to combine kind of the human touch and automation to accelerate what HubSpot calls the flywheel. So we don't look at the funnel. It's funny, back in my previous companies, everything was based around the funnel. Here we look at the flywheel. And if I just take, say, advocacy as an example of this, when you look at the attract area, there's a number of things that your advocates can do to accelerate the flywheel. So one is obviously any stories they provide, any social proof they provide will help with prospects. When you look on the engage side, answering users' questions is one example of things they can do. They can become experts on the community. And then when you look at the delight side, advocates can help with new ideas. They can speak at conferences, etc. So, I'm using advocacy as one example of how to accelerate the flywheel here. But that could basically work if you're looking at, say, user groups, things like that. So again, just kind of double clicking on the advocacy part. Here's two examples of how advocacy impacts the engage and delight area. And what I'm trying to do is, whether it's with marketing or whether with product, is really drill down for each group how they can accelerate the flywheel. And we're talking about community today, but I was asked earlier of why our group is called the Customer Engagement Group, because we really are looking at it as a customer engagement platform. And one of the initiatives we're involved in now is taking all these other groups, events, user groups, learning, customer stories, and putting them all on the customer engagement platform. They don't have to be 100% on it. So for example, user groups, you might have your user groups, we're all virtual today, your user groups run off a Zoom platform, but the engagement can happen on the customer engagement platform if you want. So really thinking about how all these stitch together. Let's talk about engagement for a second. So I'm often asked if you're moving around groups and even if you're not moving around groups, what are the key metrics you look at? What are the key KPIs? And I always answer that question as I prefer looking at an engagement metric. And with that engagement metric, a rising tide will lift all boats. And so the next question is, well, what kind of engagement metric? Here are some examples of different ones you could use. So Facebook made the DAO/MAO stickiness metric really important. So looking at daily active users over monthly active users, aiming for, kind of the goal would be 35%. Those who've been in the community space know that there's kind of the 1-90-90 rule. So, 90% of your lurkers, 9% are your folks who are, posting, someone involved, and then 1% are your super users. But what I've seen in the last 10 years plus that I've been working on this, I've been involved in community since the Prodigy and AOL, but this number 1% can go as high as 10 or 20%. It really depends on how you structure your community and how you handle engagement. You can look at the responses, who's answering, when, where, and how. So one of the things we do at HubSpot is really drill into who is actually answering that question. What's their background? What type of expertise do they have? Are they a partner? Are they a champion, etc.? Gamification, and then also product usage. So one of the indicators we look at is the percent of users, active users on the community, and how involved they are, how much they're using their portal.
So quick question on that. So do you think the engagement would be the leading or the lagging indicator? Because example for Salesforce, their community is a lot about, or it started a lot about service and self-serve. And they met one of their KPIs, what they measure is the number of tickets closed in the community. So the number of dollars generated or saved from the community, they actually have this metric, they have this KPI of the number of, tickets closed or issues closed and not open tickets, and they calculate the dollar value of that. And that for them is one of the main indicator, because it's just direct dollar value. And that takes it a lot to support, which is, I don't want to say the old way of thinking about communities. I think support is a pillar, but then why would you basically kind of nominate engagement as the leading indicator?
Yeah, great question. So I was talking about the center of gravity. So a lot of times where you are in the organization will drive the metric. Two is, this isn't the only way of looking at it. So I think you need all those other metrics as well. But, I'm often asked by senior management, what's the one single thing you're looking at? And then three is, I think if you're driving the engagement metric, what I've seen is that also your support metrics, whether it's call deflection, $20 saved, will also improve at the same time, right? So, you have all these different metrics you're tracking, but if there's a single metric that I think will impact all the other metrics, I believe it's engagement.
Okay, a quick question we have from Jenny regarding this topic. So do you measure engagement month by month, or do you look at a bigger, quarter or annual kind of?
Yeah, great question. So I'm a little neurotic. I tend to look at it on a daily basis, to be honest. But you saw the down mouse, so we look at it daily there. We're looking at it daily, monthly, quarterly, year over year. So I've just joined 6 weeks ago. And so, a lot of our dashboards are, new guy coming in and suggesting changes. But historically, that's how I've looked at it in all those different ways. Right? You want to look at year over year. That's really important for trends, right? We all know what happens during the summer, but you might see other seasonality. You want to look month over month. You want to look over, and you want to look at it by group as well. So I know I'm really slicing the onion pretty thin, but you want to look at engagement or these metrics by, say, what your moderators are doing, or say by your champions are doing, or what your partners are doing, because those are all different levers that you have. For example, a lot of communities, when I walk in for the first time, they can be heavily skewed towards the moderators answering over 50% of the questions. So I want to be able to track to reduce that number to 10 or 20%, so that encourages other users, say HubSpot users, to answer questions on the community.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So just different tactics to use to increase engagement. There's more than this. So, we've talked a lot about historically community management being facilitators or guides. You can leverage automation. I think Higher Logic does a really good job with that, for example, in getting people to fill out their profiles or take certain actions. Share the background of experts. I kind of alluded to that earlier. Is people are really interested in the type of expert or type of individual who's going to answer their question. What's their background, whether it's industry related, whether it's the type of product they have, if you have a lot of products in your company stable, things like that. Embedding community into your product. So if anybody here in the States has done their taxes with TurboTax. As you work through answering your tax-related information, there's live chat, live answers with the community. So they've done a really good job embedding into the community. Co-creation. So, right now we're looking at changing part of our community. So we have identified individuals who will join, individuals mean customers, who are going to join our team meetings, who are giving us real-time feedback on how we should build out community, gamification, and then reducing friction. So I'll talk about that in the next slide. So, I often get asked, so what's the right, sorry about the fogginess of this screen here. We have a lot of fires in San Francisco, so everything is foggy these days. So I'm often asked, like, what's the optimal path that people should take in the community? Well, that's a really hard question to answer. If you've poked around Google Analytics and looked at their user flow or path analysis, the second column there is like the landing page that people go to. And after you get past that, it gets pretty granular in terms of like trying to figure out what the optimal path is. So what I try and do, and there's a lot of information here, is steal a page from Pinterest's playbook, is I really look at the aha moments or the key moments that an action is going to be taken. So if going from left to right, somebody arrives in the community, there's kind of a setup action, which you try and encourage via onboarding. But then there's that key moment or key moments that you know whether or not you have them. So Facebook will say, if somebody has 7 or 10 friends, you have them. When I worked at Adobe, in the 24 hours, if we could get somebody with Photoshop to upload a photo, edit a photo, and share it within 24 hours, we knew that had a tremendous impact on engagement. And so it's really trying to figure out what those key moments are. And I'll share this slide with you because there's a lot of information here. And so after those aha moments, hopefully they become a habit. And there's different things you can do, like, hey, Danny, you had a really good experience, or, Danny, we noticed that you uploaded a photo, you might want to consider it again. So you're trying to build a habit. And so I tend to use this model more than looking at the different paths people take. So if you go through a redesign, you try and figure out what those aha moments are going to be, and be flexible too over time, that they could change. So key takeaways so far in this presentation is Clear Daisy, have captains of different areas who own different areas. I think of community as a customer engagement platform or an integrated service. And, answering the question earlier, is there's many metrics. I believe, there's a lot of metrics you should track. I probably lean too much into the data side, but I do believe that you can find that key engagement metric and stay with that. So one of the things I was asked was to look into the crystal ball about what's going to happen next year, which is hard to believe that next year is only 3 or 4 months away. So I think the first thing is thinking about, like, when I read a lot of community related content or articles, it tends to be a push focus versus a pull. You basically want to create a menu of, or say a buffet of different types of content and have the users pick their content. A lot of communities start out as support oriented, and then I talked about, like, how can you accelerate the different areas on the site, different areas of the company, which to be honest, I think we tend to look at the way the question, based on what I just said and how we look at these things, we tend to look at it from an org structure, but instead look at it, the classic cliche, look at it from a customer point of view, and then have these cross-functional groups to meet those needs. Community, historically, I think, even HubSpot's case, we've provided a lot of the content on there. So how can you accelerate user-generated or user-created solutions? I think the next one is interesting. We've talked about video a lot, but I think with Discourse and a few other platforms, I think voice will play an increasingly important role. A dirty secret I have is a lot of times my posts are being done via voice because I'm lazy. And so I think voice will accelerate things. And one of my hobbies is also thinking about, like, how you integrate community or discussions with Alexa, or hopefully I didn't turn on anybody's Alexa there, or Ask Google. So I think that's a really interesting area, and you see a lot of CRM systems, for example, and technology platforms playing around with voice. Between us here, community folks, I think I use this acronym called SAD, siloed, add-on, detached. A lot of communities tend to be SAD in terms of how they're structured. So really think about how you can get it more integrated. And, you know, if I had my druthers, you know, and I do drink the water, I would make community or the customer engagement platform the homepage for the company. But obviously, there's a lot of other stakeholders who are involved there. So that's the 15-minute sprint. I'll be more than happy to answer questions now or later on. So thank you.
Cool. So while we switch speakers, a question to you both. First of all, actually, a question from Andrea. What is DACI, D-A-C-I? That's for you, Scott.
Yeah, so different companies, you know, you need to, I would say the community, driving communities is not necessarily a democracy. You really need a decision maker. So that's the D. Sorry, a driver. So, you know, who's driving the project. And then the A could be your executive sponsor. So that's the approver. And then, as I've explained, it's a really cross-functional sport. So those are the contributors. And then there are just some people that just need to be informed of what's going on. And, you know, HubSpot is a very kind of cross-functional organization. And so it's really important to let not just your stakeholders know, but just, you know, anybody you think will have an interest in it, who can also contribute to the success of it. So D for driver, A for approver, C for contributor, and I for informed.
Okay. So what, and this, Don, you can hop on as well, but I mean, what you mentioned, communities are sometimes sad, and I know it's an internal acronym, but what actually makes communities fail? Why are they sad, and what makes them fail?
Yeah, yeah. So it's my acronym. I don't want to say that, you know, I don't want to be reprimanded for calling, you know, an organization something sad. But, so, you know, I think potholes are, you know, you're trying to control it too much is a classic one that people talk about. Two is, I think we often, you know, we talk about being customer first, but I think, you know, a lot of times you don't actually talk to a customer. It'd be really interesting to talk to your peers and ask them, when's the last time you actually engaged with a customer?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I talk a lot about being a data freak, but when I worked at Intuit and I met with Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, he used to take my beautiful charts in Excel and throw them in the trash and say, tell me the VOC, like tell me what customers are saying. So I think that's really important as well. I think just, you know, having your pulse of the community. And, you know, we're sitting here today saying we know community. I think another big thing is not learning from other communities. You know, Intercom just launched a community today, or they launched it recently. I just found out about it. I think it's a great way to go there and just see what they're doing and learning from them.
Right. Okay. Last question, and then we'll move it to Donnie. But again, Donnie, you can also hop in with more answers.
I would just echo that, you know, what Scott said here, and that, you know, the community really is becoming this platform to, you know, accelerate and provide better opportunity for customer success and customer enablement. And there's still, I think, a huge opportunity to educate not only the organizations, but even the marketplace on the power and the value here. And so, you know, to Scott's point, a lot of the potholes that people encounter are either, you know, the lack of understanding or the you know, not understanding the value proposition. And it goes back to that customer relationship. You know, it's really, you know, having that engagement with your customers, understanding how they're using the products and how they're sharing that knowledge.
Okay. Tiffany will answer your question in a minute. One more question for you both. We'll take then Tiffany's question, and then Donnie, you're on. So moats. Is community a moat? Is it a way for companies to be more defensible and to differentiate themselves? Salesforce thinks their community is strategically a moat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, in the case, and I'll touch upon this in a moment, but you know, if you do it right, then you should reach a point where your sales people are coming to you for, you know, the sort of the high 3-level bullet points. Is, you know, I've got an RFP, and we need to know, you know, what's the value proposition of our community. You know, the CSMs will be coming to you to understand that value proposition. They should be getting to the point where they're referencing the power of the community in order to strengthen the business in their account and the usage of the product. And even cross-pollinating that information across the accounts that they manage. So it's absolutely strategic if it's done right. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, no, yeah, I obviously agree. I think also, you know, you can, one of the questions that you always get asked is, if you launched a product, should I hire X number of people, right? And so from a kind of an ROI perspective, it's really important, because, when you introduce a new product, you can't just hire a new support person, you can't just hire a new content person. So I think it's important from that perspective too. It really reinforces the brand. There is a caveat here, is that, well, a lot of times people are concerned about customers saying things negative on the community, things like that. But people are going to be on other platforms talking about you, so you might as well, have them talk about you in your backyard or on your site as well. And I often get asked the question about, well, what about like Facebook and other platforms as well? Even though it's like a strategic asset, you don't want to ignore those other places. You want to engage with users on those other places, and hopefully you can show them that, the mothership is where they're going to get that added value.
Okay. We'll answer Tiffany's question and we'll move to Donnie. But I'll give you a question to answer after Donnie's session. How do you convince management, CEO, C-level to make communities more strategic and more embedded in all of the business? But that's answers for later on. Tiffany's question, hi, Tiffany, is so she relates to customer advocacy, loyalty, CAB, Customer Advisory Board, all these different programs, which sometimes reside in different, groups, sometimes not, depends on the company. And she's basically saying, what are your thoughts on bringing all these programs or sub-communities, advocacy community, maybe customer advisory, support community together, ideally under one department / one umbrella. So I would answer first, just to definitely know, it really differs by companies. In some companies like HubSpot, it is actually all under one department and one umbrella. In some it isn't. So first of all, it is an organizational structure, but I mean, I'll let, Scott and Danny answer that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to be under one umbrella, but I think what's more important, and we can talk later about, like, how to sell community or convince senior management, but it's more important that you're all at the same table, and you get, alignment in terms of what you're trying to solve for. And the reason one reason to have it under one umbrella is you find groups will go off and not, like, they'll have their own search, you'll have your own search, they'll have their own single sign-on, you'll have your own single sign-on, so things like that. But, if I had my druthers, it'd be under one umbrella, but more important is, like, you're all at the same table with the customer and trying to figure out, like, what success looks like.
Absolutely. And we can go into this a little bit, in more detail later, but I think you really need to understand, where do you sit in the organization? How's the top management being measured? Your, C-level executive being measured, and how does that cascade down to your immediate metrics, and ensure that there's buy-in there. But then you certainly want to cross-pollinate that across the organization. I'll touch upon that in a moment. So again, thanks again for having me, Donnie Weinstein here. So I'm just going to reset the stage a little bit. So, from a community perspective, this is not a new, phenomenon. These kinds of conversations have been happening for, for decades. Our parents, grandparents were, reaching out to their trusted friends at the neighborhood barbecue, kids' soccer game, calling a knowledgeable friend. If you had a problem with your car, you weren't going to call Ford. You were going to call your neighbor Joe, who knew cars, or the same thing with your refrigerator. And the same is true in a professional environment. You're simply going to reach out to that knowledgeable colleague. And so, with the invention of the internet and everything going online, the access to that information has certainly become more prevalent. So, I came up with this model, this MSE model for community, and really and the value proposition even goes beyond this, but there's really 4 major pillars here, and we had a number of questions about where should community sit in the organization, and I think that, the answer really depends, but certainly having a seat at the table and having visibility and influence across the organization is critical. Because the community is really becoming mainstream now. It is a beeline or a straight line to influencing and impacting customer success and customer enablement and usage of your product. And so I'll get into more detail here, but really, when you think about it, from an advocacy perspective for marketing and sales, your top customers are the ones who are going to be the most passionate about your brand they're also going to typically be the most active users of your product. And so there's a wealth of opportunity there to tap into to help drive and move the needle as far as how marketing is typically measured. Historically, again, most communities have been siloed, whether it be a support community, dev community, an innovation community, an advocacy community. It really should be thought of as a platform that goes across the entire organization. So clearly, as communities evolve, develop, and create a knowledge base of great answers and solutions, that's going to have a direct impact on support deflection, because again, your customer is going to Google that information, they're going to search the information, they're going to find that information for frequently asked questions in your community. On the education front, that great content is going to enable your customers to learn and grow and use your products more rapidly than without the community. And so that has a direct impact on adoption of your product. The more knowledge they can get to absorb and use your product, that has a direct impact on adoption. And then lastly, and Scott touched upon this as well, this is a great resource to tap into ideation and to move the needle on innovation. And so again, those users of your product are going to have great ideas about how to make a product better, whether it be a core product or a service or both, and listening and tapping into that and creating an ideas exchange where those ideas can be crowdsourced, loaded up, and commented on is a wealth of information. And all of these four can have a direct impact on how those organizations are being measured. Second here. So from a advocacy perspective, and this is a key area that we wanted to touch upon today. Again, those top customers are, not only the most passionate about your brand and in the community, but they also represent an opportunity to have a direct impact on your company's ability to upsell and retain those accounts, and also expand your business through referrals. And when I was at Dome, we were able to look at, we had really smart data scientists that worked for us, and we had account health scorecards for accounts. And we could actually show that those accounts that had active members in community versus those that did not were typically healthier and less at risk than those accounts that had no activity in the community. And so, that's sort of one data point. But again, if you've got a passionate customer that wants to tell their story, then they're going to become or create a pool of customers who will speak at your webinars. They're going to speak at your user groups, your annual conferences, and also become referrals for new business. And so that's a huge piece of the puzzle here. And finding those folks in a well-run community is going to be a great asset for the marketing and sales team. As I mentioned earlier, the measurement you've got, the account health scorecard. There's also, I think, as CrowdKit's trying to do in the marketplace, getting a 360-degree view of your customers and their behavior. How much are they using your product? What content are they consuming? How active are they in community? And all of these things can be directly tied to your NPS scores.
Danny, before you move on, actually, there's a question from
Yeah.
Bev. Hi, Bev. So exactly on this topic, she's basically asking, do you think there's a correlation between engaged community members and, static, vocal customers, advocates, so that community becomes the best place for marketing to recruit and mobilize customer advocates?
Yeah, so I would certainly agree with that.
She was asking if that's the fact, like if community is the best place to find those.
So I would certainly say yes. Again, if the community is well run and developed and has become a key place to, or a magnet for your most active and passionate customers to migrate to for information and to connect with others, then it absolutely can become probably the richest place to recruit those pool of advocates. Now, not everybody's going to be very active in community. I mean, you go back to the 99-1 model that Scott had mentioned earlier, where the majority of people are lurkers. But I would say at the same time, those passionate customers are going to discover and will be engaged at some level in community. And I think as they, you connect them to each other, and you identify those power users, and you start to publicize user groups and conferences, that collective is going to show up, and it is going to become, and has become a great place to to recruit those folks. So selfishly, I would say that it is absolutely, if not the best, it's certainly one of the best places to find those advocates.
And have you seen correlation between people who are contributors, what's called maybe in the community language, and sometimes in the support domain, they're just, you know, power users and they like to talk about the product versus advocates? So, or do you see that sometimes people who are very passionate about, you know, solving for others, being product experts, are not necessarily going to run and, you know, tell your story outside?
No, I see a high correlation. At least in the case of Domo, that was certainly the case.
Okay.
You know, again, if you think about the situation, we had a SaaS product. These are business analysts, data intelligence, IT administrators that have very limited staff. They're trying to scale a product or the usage of the product very quickly in their account. And they're working with limited access or limited set of information in order to scale rapidly. And so what they found is that the community really helped them to accelerate their knowledge so that they could get better in using our product, but also to train and onboard new people. And again, if they're answering the questions and helping others, they're certainly not going to be shy about telling their Domo story or their product story or their usage story on behalf of your brand. If they're not passionate about the brand, then they're unlikely going to be there to help others.
Okay.
That make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So the other key thing is that, and again, this is very true for a B2B environment, is the professional development story. And so there's a number of reasons, and I'm going to share a link later on. There's a great blog post from Holly Firestone, who's a good friend, which is called the Snap Model. Why this really explains why power users, participate in community, and that Snap model goes to status, networking, access, perks. Even more recently, there's a thought that talks about ownership, but in the B2B space, the professional development really is huge. And you can have really a couple things. There's the activity and the participation in community. There's also, getting certifications. And so what I'm sharing here really are quotes from 3 different customers of mine that provided recommendations on LinkedIn, which the reason I'm sharing is just to call out the impact that community had on their professional development. And so they're telling me here that, the community actually allowed them to accomplish way more than they thought was possible. They were able to ramp up much more quickly. And it also expedited their professional development. And so, again, in the B2B space, if you're trying to, scale the, whether the certification of your users or the knowledge of your users, community is a great way to crowdsource and leverage that one-to-many model in order to reach those goals.
Okay. By the way, Jillian is mentioning, hi, Jillian, 2 things I think that it's worthwhile sharing with everybody that basically for them, she's from Click, basically, kind of business intelligence company. And they optimize their community for Google. One of the things, so I guess for demand generation and bringing in new customers, basically they saw that, community is a great tool to kind of create better search where people are asking those questions and reach Click versus, I guess, their competition and engage with the community and maybe eventually, kind of be more lean toward buying Click. So I think it's a great comment by Jillian. Thank you for that. I don't know if HubSpot, I'm pretty sure that optimizes it's community for search. HubSpot is top search on everything almost. And I don't know, Danny, if you had that experience as well.
No, absolutely. So we had an SEO, in-house and external consultants who helped me to, optimize the Google search and the SEO. That's very critical, and certainly having a lot of your content exposed in Google is critical to drive the traffic to your site. Of course, the other point that Scott talked about earlier is the product integration. So having a clean experience within your overall product experience and making community front and center is also quite critical, because again, the users of your product are the ones who are going to be relevant for not only consuming the content in the community, but also becoming key participants in the community.
Right.
I would add is that, right, so community obviously is great for SEO, and content as well as like whoever your SEO person is, like make sure they have like a kind of holistic approach, right? Because you could cannibalize um, some of your other SEO efforts. So.
Cool.
Correct. And then the other thing that I'll just touch on real quickly is just, again, this talks to, this is, and I'll share the link to this in my slides. Again, we talked about the, why top customers participate in community, but just some sampling, again, this is our annual community awards. We had the community was called the Dojo. It was like a martial arts center of excellence, and we came up with a belt structure. So the last community conference that we ran, we actually handed out, we had our top 5 customers earn black belts, and I came up with the idea, and we procured real black belts for those top contributors. At the same time, we had a certification program that launched in parallel through the education team, and so these two are running in parallel again. From a professional development perspective, for those customers to have not only their black belt status as well as their certification was key for them to feel like they're actually growing with with our product, and feeling like they're reaching a certain level of knowledge that they can demonstrate and have on their LinkedIn profile.
I think that also relates to another question we had about how do you delight customers, and I saw Scott related a bit to that in the chat. But I mean, both of you are welcome to talk a bit about, I guess, delighting and connecting customers to the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's, you're going to go back to why, those customers are participating. And so if you think about the majority are lurkers, they want a quick way to find, search, and consume that information. But then, the ones that are really engaged on a regular basis between that 1% and 10% level are really going to be the foundation and the secret sauce for your community. And so they're there really for a variety of reasons. And it goes back to, the status, the status again that the community provides, the networking ability, the access to information. Again, of your top members in community, you're going to get them direct access maybe to early release notes of a new product release. You're going to get them to key conversations with some of your top product leads. Because again, they become, again, a trusted advisor. I think Scott touched upon this earlier. They're going to start joining calls with, they essentially become part of your extended team. Once they reach a certain level, and they've proven that you can trust them with the level of knowledge that they have. And it goes back to, again, this newer element of, it's now a no snap model that Holly talks about, which is ownership. And so, you get to the point where, again, we would run user groups around the country, and it would take a lot of resources and money to run those. But you get to the point where, we can actually give the keys to the city to these customers to start running their own user groups. And get their peers together when they can, and then you provide them some basic resources in order to do that. So again, it goes back to, again, it's not just the swag that has limited life. It's really about the access to information, the knowledge share, the connecting to others like themselves, belonging, and becoming part of the extended team.
One thing I would add is, so when I think about like new feature, like somebody was asking me about where community should be, and I said product, maybe because I want to be a product person. No, but I think, whenever we're adding a new feature, new functionality, we try and be a research, figure out what the expectation is of that. And then when we develop it, is try and figure out two things. One is, what's the emotional response we could get out of that person by, surprising and delighting them. And 2 is, how can we exceed that expectation? And it might not be the first, and we might do an MVP first or V1. But then afterwards, like, how can we get the emotional response and exceed the expectation?
Okay. Danny, are you done so we can go into questions, or you have?
Yeah, I'm done. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, cool. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. I do see a question about public versus private, and that's a great question. So I think, here, I think it goes back to your, to your goals. I would tend to, you'd likely want to have the majority of your community to be public. And part of the reason there is that you want to be able to take advantage of the search engines, regardless of where you are in the world, and make that content go viral. Of course, there are benefits to having sections of the community that are private. And so if it's for an internal employee community, if you want to share, collaborate about, wins from customers, or solutions that you're not ready to share publicly, but collaborate internally about them with your employees, that's certainly one opportunity. But then, of course, with those top 1%ers that are trusted now, that are now trusted advisors, you can't create, limited access areas for those folks to collaborate and with you as part of that extended team. And then when ready, you can certainly move that content into a public domain.
Anything to add on that, on the public versus private community, Scott?
No, I agree with everything he said. There's lots of benefits for having it open, SEO, etc. But yeah, you should definitely have private areas, for example, like for your champions, or, even certain user groups could be, if you have your user groups represented on there. Or another good example, actually, a better one is beta testers, right? So you want a private area where beta testers can share feedback on a new product or feature.
Yeah, so I think, thank you. So first of all, before we end, I just want to say thank you, Danny and Scott, for all your answers. Now we'll take a few more. There's a few questions. I hope we can answer all of them. So everybody stay with us till the end. But I mean, thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for sharing all this information. I think it was great. And again, this was recorded so we can share with others. So let's dive into some more questions. Tuvi, I hope I'm saying this correctly, the name, is asking about the whole, differentiation between user groups and user group leaders, super users versus, customer advocates. I think this also was raised earlier with Tiffany and other people. Again, I think this is like a theme that is asked a lot in this session about, the different types of, if you will, customer groups or customer contributor groups, whether it's, user groups, contributors in the community, advocates, versus having, one theme, one, score program. How do you look at that, and how do you actually solve for that?
Yeah, so I think it's, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it's, I don't think you necessarily differentiate. I think there's a broader pool, again, if they're ready to speak at a user group, they by definition are an advocate, because if they're not ready to, if they're going to speak at a user group to talk about your brand, then they by definition are your advocate. I think you need to put a framework in place that, identifies, how you define them as, let's say, an advocate, because again, not everybody's going to have the time to be that top 1%er in the community, but they may be doing other things where they're going to get on a reference call or do other thing like that. So I think having a close partnership with your, people and client services, the customer success managers, the account executives, and also marketing. You need to have a clear view of, okay, who are the pool of people that we have as customers that we can tap into, and where are they driving that value? And then from there, you can then select, okay, here's candidates for a user group, here's candidates for a webinar, here's candidates to be, recognized in our community.
Yeah, it's funny, our chief operating officer, she has her main principle is alignment is the new strategy. And so I think when you look at something like this, it's really important to get, I talked about the table metaphor, getting everybody at the table and getting alignment around a common framework, common system, common currency with points. And that could affect, behavior in the community. It could be somebody speaks at a conference, it could be a number of things, but it's just not, just not marketing, not customer success. And so it takes a lot of work up front because we show customers our org charts on a lot of these things, right? We tend to have like this group here, doing a lot of hand motions here, so watch my hands, right? But the customer sees us as one company. So it behooves us to have this common framework, common way of positioning it. What is the overarching theme? And how do you score or track all those different behaviors? So in our world, you might do something on the academy, which is another group, and in the community, right? And, you want to come up with kind of that Euro currency, or, I'll call it the Hero because it's HubSpot, currency that's common across all the different touch points.
Okay.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, one of the features we had in our platform was the thing of bonus points. So again, you have automated ways to go with the ranking, but if somebody created an amazing, video on YouTube, or they actually spoke at a user conference, then I would bump up their rank as recognition for that effort. Again, they don't have the time to post 10 or answer 10, 20 questions in the community every month, but they do have time to go create this incredible video that's going to get 1,000 views a month, and they're going to be on a panel at our user conference, that also has tremendous value from a branding perspective. So again, I think having, a common currency across the organization and educating everybody about that is key.
Right. Um, so another question we had, how do you, from Jebby, can you provide an example of, how customer marketing can influence referrals? I'll take at least a bit of that. And I'll say that even in the community framework, once you have contributors, once you have people who you can, you see that they're active, of course, with, a scalable customer marketing approach or a programmatic approach, you can basically say, are you satisfied? If they're satisfied, it's just another ask. You can basically say, if you're satisfied, same way that you would ask, would you refer a friend? That's a classic NPS question. You could ask it live in the community, can you refer another friend? Can you bring somebody to see the value of this community and maybe the value of this product? So it's really identifying those who are anyway happy, and the community helps you and satisfied and engaged. And that's a lot of what Scott and Danny alluded to. And then, making the ask. If you have anything to add on that. And then there's a question from Jenny. Yeah, she asked me that before. But this is, how important is it to add a human element to the community? Tricky one.
I think it's extremely important.
And how do you do it?
Yeah.
Well, so
Go ahead.
no, I would agree. It's very critical. So as you start out, and I build many communities, you really need to be, engaged in the community. You've got to develop relationships, and that starts with private messaging and, recognizing people in the community, but really developing a personal relationship initially online with particularly those top contributors. But then as you start to scale and you have meetups, you have that human face behind the avatar. That's a critical success factor. It can't be that you're answering everything with bots.
Yeah, so I think there's also what you do from a branding perspective when people go to the site and see it. And two is, if you have community managers or one community manager is, it's almost like taking who they are and blending it with who the community is. What do I mean by that? So, in my previous company, I was running community, but this woman, Liz, became the face of the community. And people got to know, we did consciously put her in situations where people, and she was really great at it too, put her in situations where people would know that if they had a problem, they would go to her, and she became the face of it. I think it's also how you answer your questions, how you interact with them. So there's a whole bunch of tactical things that you do. But they also need to ladder up to, what do you want your community to be? So at Intuit, the brand attributes were knowledgeable and approachable, right? So every time you're answering a question or interacting, look, how can you kind of sprinkle in those attributes into your interaction?
Okay. Another question from Tiffany. So and I know that we're really at the hour, so we'll try to take 2 more minutes of questions and end the session. Sure. Great to have a lot of questions, but I'm not sure we'll be able to answer all of them. So Tiffany's asking, what are some of the ways, strategies to get alignment among different departments, teams who have competing priorities?
Yeah, so this goes back to the model I was sharing earlier, again, and there's probably more than these 4 large verticals, but I think it goes back to, where do you happen to sit in your organization, making sure that you're aligned with your C-level executive and your CEO. That's number 1. And that you've got a beachhead to deliver in the near term on, the metrics that matter to them, but at the same time, have a roadmap that's going to provide value to those sister organizations. And I think as you can identify and demonstrate the value that's going to bring, if you're sitting in support and now you have value to provide to engineering, to marketing, and to education, you need to have those conversations and saying, here's the value proposition, understand where the conflict is on resources, and have those conversations on, okay, how do you optimize the value proposition, across the organization? And hopefully that can bring to resolution.
Yeah. So we'll end with one question from an anonymous attendee. Why would you attend anonymously? We're a fun forum. Before that, I'll just say to Serena and anyone else who's asking, at the beginning of the chat, there's the link to the event tomorrow and the session and the free access. So go back to the beginning of the chat and you'll see it with the link and the code. Okay, last question for everybody. From anonymous attendee. How often do you think you should engage with your customers in your customer advocacy program? And what do you think would be the best way? Email, phone call, social, community, other? And with that, we will end. So before we end and you answer, thank you again, Danny. Thank you again, Scott. Thank you again, everybody, for participating and staying. We'll answer that question and we'll say goodbye. Your answers.
So, again, I think it depends on, who has a relationship with that customer already. So if they're a community, a top 1% of the community, then the admin or the key person in community is going to already have a relationship through, let's say, private messaging, and likely have a direct relationship through email. If there are others that are identified through the customer success manager or the account executive, then again, they'll have that relationship. So it's really, I would just say, you're not running a campaign. You already have identified, I think, those passionate customers, and it's really leveraging the existing communication channel that the person at your company has with those people.
Anything
I
to
agree.
add, Scott? Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also, you have a really good back-end system. I always tell people understand their vice. Like their vice could be chat, or their vice could be a push, their vice could be email. It could be human interaction. So, if you're really set up properly, you can understand how they engage with you earlier on and then leverage that way. Some people tend to be more Slack. Some people tend to be more email. We deal with that every day.
So thank you again, Scott and Danny. Thank you, everybody. We have more than 20 people still on. Amazing. We're over the hour. I hope we answered all the questions. I think it was great value. Again, it's recorded, so we'll share it. And have a great day and a great week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.